Hello everyone. This is another entry in my video diary about my breast reduction and tummy tuck experience. In this video I'm going to talk a little bit about choosing a plastic surgeon. This is a really important decision, and there's a couple of resources that I found in my search that I thought might be helpful for other people. The first thing to do is obviously see who's in your area. There is a school of thought, I guess you could say, or a group of people who choose to go out of the country for this surgery. One of the big reasons for that is that it's cheaper. In other countries, two real popular places are Mexico and the Dominican Republic, at least if you live here in the United States. And the other reason to go out of the country is that there's something to be said for the fact that some of the results, especially from the Dominican Republic doctors, seem to be really dramatic. Very hourglass figures, very whittled in waists. It seems that they're a bit more aggressive in their techniques than a lot of US doctors. And so that, if that's a particular look, that might be something you want to look into. For me, it was something that I wasn't comfortable with. I mean, on the cost side, it may seem like it's less, but once you factor in the travel down there, the time you need to spend down there, the fact that I wouldn't want to be down there by myself, so then I'd have to pay for someone else to go with me. And then the worry about getting good follow-up care once I got back to the States. If I had any complications, all of those were reasons that didn't make sense for me. The results are impressive, but they're also very dramatic, and I want my waist to be smaller, I want my stomach to be flatter, I want my breasts to be smaller and more proportioned, but I don't really have any desire to look like a doll. And so that just didn't make sense for me. So I knew I wanted somebody in the Atlanta area. Now, Atlanta is a big actual metro area. It's not terribly easy to get around. We don't have a great public transportation system. Not that I'd be using public transportation before or after plastic surgery anyway, but I wanted not only someone in the metro Atlanta area, but somebody that's not too long of a drive from my house. I'm just sensitive to the fact that if I do have a complication, I've read about some folks who have complications who may have to make weekly visits to their plastic surgeon for a period of time. And I don't want to be driving an hour and a half round trip if that happens. Luckily, I'm close enough to the city that there are lots of options within, a 30-minute range of my house. So that's kind of where I started. That helped me narrow it down a good bit. Then I looked for online reviews. There's some basic doctor online reviews like ratemd.com, Vital Health or healthvital.com. You get like actual star ratings and then maybe a couple of sentences up to a paragraph of a review on a doctor. That's helpful. For plastic surgeons specifically, I cannot recommend realself.com highly enough. It's great. Some doctors have tons of reviews on there. Others only have a few, but they're usually quite detailed, and that's a great place to start. If your doctor isn't on realself.com, I'd be a little bit worried, honestly, because I think all the ones that are kind of plugged in know that that's kind of the site that people check out a lot, and they actually work to build a relationship with their patients that are on that site, and I think that's important. So once you have narrowed your list down based on their online presence, and for me, another thing I look for is how effective is their online presence. I'm very much a techno geek to a certain extent, and I tend to not trust businesses in 2014 that have not invested some time and resources into having a strong online presence. So if they don't have a strong online presence, that's already a little bit of a strike against them. It makes me worry about how accessible they're going to be, etc. But once you've narrowed that list down, then it's time to schedule consultations. My biggest tip on that is that when I first scheduled consultations, I was looking to get my breast reduction covered by insurance. Ultimately, that proved not to be possible, but because I initially called and set up those consultations as being involved with my insurance, I had to pay a $50 fee for every consultation because that was my specialist copay with my insurance. So they treated each consultation like a specialist visit. And I think in hindsight, I maybe could have been a little less, I could have not broadcast the fact that I was looking for insurance coverage and potentially had free consultations. I know at least a few of the surgeons advertised on realself.com that they offered free consultations for purely cosmetic procedures. So I don't know. Ultimately, I ended up paying the $50 to all my different consultations. So that kind of sucked. But at the end of the day, I feel good about the fact that I'm really, really comfortable with my surgeon. He was not the first one I met with, and I really liked the first one I met with. And if I hadn't met with more, I probably would have picked him, and I probably would have done fine. But I'm so glad that I didn't just go with the first one I met with. A couple of things about consultations. You learn a lot about your surgeon just from the way they structure the consultation. The first one I went to, again, I thought he was perfectly nice. I remember calling my husband when I left. I was like, I love him, I love him. He was so much more expensive than the other folks that I met with, but I didn't know that when I didn't have anything to compare it to. And he also, you know, it was a very typical doctor's office. It was a small office. I went in, I did a history with his nurse. They had me disrobe. I had on a little paper gown, and he came in, he did a physical exam first. And then he had me sit on the exam table with my paper gown on, and he sat in a stool in front of me, and we just talked, and I asked questions and he answered them, and that was fine. And I'm not a very modest person to begin with, so I wasn't really terribly uncomfortable with the fact that I was sitting there naked in a paper gown. But in hindsight, I was like, after I saw how some other doctors did it, it's like that wasn't a very sensitive way for him to handle that. The surgeon I ultimately picked did things quite differently. Again, I did a history with his nurse. I disrobed, he came in, he did the physical exam, and then he excused himself and invited me to get dressed. I got dressed, he came back in. The way his exam room was set up, there's actually a table off to the side with a big monitor. And we sat down at that table, and he took me through on the monitor, step by step, how each surgery was done. And he showed me befores and afters, not just innies, but he picked ones that were similar to my body type. And he had a notepad, and I asked so many questions. He started drawing me diagrams, and it was great. And he spent over an hour with me, and made me feel like he didn't have anywhere else to be, that nothing was more important than me during that hour. And I loved that. And I felt very respected by the fact that we had that conversation when I was fully clothed. Again, it didn't really bother me when it happened with the first surgeon, but I liked what that communicated to me about his level of respect and sensitivity for his patients with the second consult. So I would stress that you actually meet doctors face to face. Ultimately, if you decide to go back to your first person you met with, that's great, but don't assume that that's where you need to end up. Another thing that I think is important is if you have any difficulties, once you think you've picked your surgeon, any difficulties in communications with their office, then you need to rethink that. One of the things I love about the surgeon I've chosen is his office has been so responsive. And right after I booked, I sent another list of questions. I'm just a never-ending fount of questions. And they responded, and the surgery coordinator responded, said she'd forwarded them to the doctor, and then within about 20 minutes, I got an email from the doctor himself with his personal email address, answering all my questions in detail and inviting me to communicate with him through his personal email going forward if I have any further questions. So that made me feel really good. I also made friends with someone on Real Self who just had her surgery with the same surgeon, and I've been communicating with her, and her post-op experience with him has been fantastic. She's had his personal cell phone number. She's texted him on the weekends, and he's gotten right back to her to answer questions. He's met with her on a Saturday when he was concerned about something. So I like that. So that would be my advice. Do your online research. Put some thought into location and how important that is to you. Obviously, if you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of plastic surgeons, that may be limited. But for us girls that live in more urban areas, then that's not usually a problem. And then just meet with more than one. Ultimately, I met with 5. I'm very, very confident on the one that I picked. And I don't have any concerns, and I feel that I trust him totally. So good luck with your search. And if you have any other questions about my consultation specifically, or if you want to know anything else, please comment. Thanks.